Hello everyone and welcome to this part 6 of my complete Doctor Who DVD collection, overview, review and all the rest of it. So as you can see here, we are down to just the last two main TV Doctors, this being the 6th Doctor, Colin Baker. Quite a controversial era, it has to be said. But what do I think of Colin Baker as the Doctor and his era? Well, we'll soon find out. So, let's get started. So we begin now with the Colin Baker era, starting with his first story after the Caves of Androzani, which was the Twin Dilema. I quite like the Doctor and Perry, the way they interact in this story. So episode 1 is not too bad, but the rest of this story is just very forgettable. I really didn't like any of the story, really. The two twins in this are irritating. The characters in this are just very two-dimensional, and yeah, it's not a very good story at all. I'd probably give this one a 2 out of 10. I just really didn't like very much about it. Episode 1, like I said, is not too bad. And then we have another story, which is much better, Attack of the Cybermen. A lot of people really like this story with Colin Baker. I really quite enjoyed this one. I thought it was a great little story. No, it's not the greatest Cyberman story in the world, but it's definitely not one of the worst. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. Of course, this is quite well known for having a rather violent scene portrayed where one of the characters' hands are squeezed by the Cybermen and they end up bleeding. And it's quite graphic, but I think by today's standards it's fairly tame. Of course, this is when the whole controversy of Doctor Who becoming quite a violent show started to emerge, and of course from that it was questions over whether Doctor Who had much more of a lifespan. So Colin Baker's era was fraught with problems virtually from the start. But this is a good Cyberman story, like I said. The Doctor is a bit of a badass in this. Perry and the Doctor, the way they interact is really good. And like I said, I actually quite like Colin Baker as the Doctor, and I like the way him and Perry interact. So it's very rare that the Doctor is actually the problem with the story. It's usually the execution or the cast or the story itself. But yeah, one of my favourites, I would say, from the Colin Baker era. And next we have a definite classic here, Vengeance on Varos. One of my favourites, and of course introduces the poo-looking character there, Syl, the enemy of the Doctor in this story as well. Vengeance on Varos is a great story. I give it an 8 out of 10. It's a very contemporary story. I mean, it's based around the idea of Big Brother and how reality TV and everything has a very influential influence over our day-to-day lives and how we're consumed by it. So in that respect, Vengeance on Varos is probably the most relevant story today from the classic era. So yeah, and there's a fantastic cliffhanger with the Doctor. Yeah, it's a great story. Probably, I would say, widely regarded as his best. Is it my favourite? I wouldn't say it's my favourite. It's definitely one of my favourites. But yeah, Vengeance on Varos is a great story. And the Doctor's really good. He really shines in that story. Then we have The Mark of the Rani, which is okay. I give it a 6 out of 10. The Rani isn't particularly menacing, really. And the Master, there was really no need for him to be in this story. Again, the Doctor and Perry are good in this, and there are some moments. It's not a bad story, but it wasn't overly exciting. I give it a 6 out of 10. And then we come to the two Doctors, and of course we have the Sontarans and the return of my favourite Doctor, Patrick Troughton. Of course, this is going to be one that I really enjoy, and yeah, I really like it, and a lot of it is set on location in Spain as well. Quite a fun little run around, and of course Jamie, the Doctor's companion, the 2nd Doctor that is, makes a reappearance in this, so it's great to see Jamie back. So yeah, the two Doctors, probably I would say this is my favourite, along with maybe Vengeance on Varos. I give this an 8 out of 10. I like the two Doctors. Next up we have Timelash, which is not a good story. I mean, you can see that the budget probably mostly went on the villain here, because the makeup on him is pretty good. And they tried to go with a sort of Sutek type story, which didn't really work at all. It just didn't have the same impact. It looks very low budget, and the portal here is basically sort of concealed with what is essentially Christmas tinsel. So it really wasn't a very strong story for Colin Baker's era. Yeah, Timelash it's not the worst story, but it's crap. I give it a 4 out of 10. It is quite funny in places because it's so bad, but yeah, I don't hate it, but it's definitely not good. And then we have Revelation of the Daleks. Now, this is quite a popular Dalek story, and one of people's favourites from the 6th Doctor. Personally, I think it's a good story. Davros is quite good, the Daleks are quite good, but a lot of the story kind of drags for me, because it seems to be just the Doctor and Perry walking and talking, really, until they get to where they need to go. And Alexei Sale appears in this. Of course, he was known for being in The Young Ones, and he's a sort of DJ, which I thought was a bit strange. And the guy who played Richard from Keeping Up Appearances makes an appearance in this, and he's pretty good. It's not the last time he appears in Doctor Who. He makes an appearance in New Who. But yeah, Revelation of the Daleks. It's a good story. I give it a 7, but it's not one of the best Dalek stories ever. And finally, now we come to the 14-part mammoth story, The Trial of a Time Lord. And of course, it's been separated into different parts for relevance of the story, but really it is a 14-part story, so it actually is the longest single story from classic Doctor Who, longer than the Daleks Master Plan, longer than the War Games, longer than the Invasion. Yeah, 14 parts split into sort of chapters. It's different to the Key to Time, because the Key to Time has a story arc, but of course individual episodes, whereas this, as it says on the spine, it all says Trial of a Time Lord. So the first one is parts 1 to 4, The Mysterious Planet, the last fully fledged story written by Robert Holmes before his sad passing. And yeah, I think this one was quite a good story. Again, it was quite good. Yeah, I give it maybe a 7 out of 10. It was good. It was quite a fun story, and the court scenes were quite good in this one. And yeah, it's not usually regarded as people's favourite, but I think it's quite a good start. Then we have Mindwarp, which is usually most people's favourite. It's the return of Syl, who was fantastic in Vengeance on Varos, but I don't think he was utilised as well in this story. It also has Brian Blessed, which is always a plus. And Perry departs in this story in quite dramatic fashion. I don't think the departure of Perry was as well executed as I thought it might have been. It's more the Doctor's reaction to Perry being essentially killed, sorry for spoilers, rather than her actual departure leaving an impact, which was sad because I really like Perry, one of my favourites. I don't think they did enough, and the story is a little bit confusing actually, and a little bit convoluted, but I think people like this one mostly because of Perry's departure and the return of Syl. But it is a good story. Again, I give it a 7 out of 10. And then we get the introduction of Mel by Bonnie Langford, who I am not a fan of. And look at those strange phallic-shaped aliens there. A very suspect-looking alien there, I must say. But, yeah, Terror of the Vervoids, which is parts 9 to 12, Mindwarp being parts 5 to 8. Yeah, parts 9 to 12, Terror of the Vervoids. I actually think this is my favourite, and that might be a controversial choice, because I don't think a lot of people really rate this story. But I quite like Terror of the Vervoids. I thought it was a nice sort of fresh change. These two stories were good, but they were sort of sticking to a much more sort of darker edge, whereas this one was a little bit more light-hearted, and I quite like the concept of it being sort of set on a space sort of cruise kind of thing, like a holiday camp type thing. Yeah, again, it's not the greatest story, but yeah, I quite liked Terror of the Vervoids. I would say it's probably my favourite, but one of the things that drags it down is Mel. I just can't stand her. Just a pointless companion. And then we get parts 13 to 14, The Ultimate Foe with the Master. And again, I think this is pretty good. This goes very sort of strange and very weird and quite psychedelic in places. But again, it was quite a nice departure from the first two stories. And it's different to the more light-hearted Terror of the Vervoids. But yeah, I quite like The Ultimate Foe. I think it was good. I give this a 7 out of 10. So all four stories really are quite close. They all get 7 out of 10. Nothing spectacular, nothing overly memorable about Trial of the Time Lord. Some of the court scenes in these stories really drag out and sometimes are a little bit pointless. They feel a bit like filler, and the story feels very formulaic. And of course, this was season 23, and the original season 23 was obviously cancelled after season 22. There was a sort of hiatus. And the Trial of a Time Lord really does reflect the era, because it was Doctor Who as the series on trial to see if it would sustain any more longevity. And of course, with Sylvester McCoy, it did for another few years or so. But sadly, Colin Baker was axed as the Doctor. He didn't really get a proper regeneration either, which I think was sad. But personally, I really like Colin Baker. I think he's a pretty damn good Doctor. I just think it was ruined by the fact that a lot of stories like Timelash, Trial of a Time Lord not being as strong as it could have been, and other stories like Twin Dilema and very average stories like Mark of the Rani, and the fact that he didn't have that many stories in his sort of era to really bring out the best in him. And of course, Big Finish has done so much for the Sixth Doctor, and it has displayed his abilities to convey his bombastic and quite dark and serious side really well. But there are some great highlights, like I said: Attack of the Cybermen, Vengeance on Varos, the Two Doctors, and a lot of moments throughout Trial of a Time Lord, which gives him some, you know, real sort of standing as one of the first 7 Doctors of the original classic TV series. So yeah, do I prefer Colin Baker to Peter Davison? Yes, I do. Purely as the Doctor, his era, obviously Peter Davison had a lot more stories, and there's a lot more classic stories like this one right here. But as the Doctor, I preferred Colin Baker personally. I just liked his more serious, sarcastic, and quite dark elements to him at times personally. But that is the end of the Colin Baker era, short and sweet that it is. And in the next episode, I will be doing the final part, which will be, of course, Sylvester McCoy's era, as well as going over the very short-lived Paul McGann era with the TV movie. And then after that, I will be doing New Who. So as you can see down here, all the New Who series from Series 1 to the latest series, Series 10. But still focusing on the classic era at this moment. So yeah, Colin Baker's era, overall I would give it, say, a 6.5 out of 10. It's an okay era. It's definitely not one of the highlights. There are, like I said, some gems in there, but overall it's not one of the strongest eras. But I do like Colin Baker very much as the Doctor. So yeah, part 7 will be coming soon, and don't forget, like, subscribe, share and comment, and I will see you folks on the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.